Hello and welcome to Real Chat with Kat, the podcast dedicated to igniting your entrepreneurial spirit and empowering you to conquer new horizons. In this podcast, we chat with inspiring entrepreneurs on their journey to success through some amazingly insightful and expansive conversations. These episodes thrive on thought-provoking chats where our guests fearlessly explore their path to success, sharing their experiences, failures, and triumphs. No topic is off limits as we deep dive into the talked about and not so talked about pieces it takes to build a business, overcome limiting beliefs, deal with personal struggles, and everything in between that shapes our lives and our businesses. I'm your host, Kat Polsinelli, creator and founder at The Lotus Effect, where we believe that success is not just about strategies and tactics, it's about cultivating a powerful mindset and creating customized business operations that align with you and your true purpose. Whether it's mastering time management, improving productivity, enhancing leadership skills, or simply fostering a growth-oriented mindset, we'll provide you with the tools and strategies to flourish in both your business and personal life. I'm so excited to have you join us today in this episode, so get ready to feel empowered and inspired as we learn together and from one another on how to rise above challenges, break through limitations, and unlock our full potential. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Real Chat with Kat. I am so excited to have you here with us today, and I have a really awesome guest. We have had a really great conversation prior to already, and got totally off on another tangent, so we're going to have so much fun. So, Wendy, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Oh my gosh, Kat, thank you so much for having me and inviting me. I adore you. So everyone buckle up because this is going to be a great, fun episode. I know that I can feel it already.
We're going to have so much fun. So thank you so much again, Wendy, for being a part of the podcast. Do us all a favor as we get started and tell us who you are, what it is that you do, and what got you into your space.
Sure. Well, so who am I? It's a great question. And and the way I actually start defining who I am is I am a mom to two amazing young men. And I also happen to be an intuitive mentor for visionary disruptors. So what it is that I do in this world is I help those business women to define who it is that they are by tapping into and learning how to listen and trust their intuitive I can voice so that they can start disrupting business as usual. It's all about disrupting that status quo to really start building their own tables and accelerating their ability to hit multi six figures, if not seven figures. And so I am hugely passionate about that. And the reason why is because that's been who I am since the day I was born. You know, Kat, you and I were talking about this. Like I've always been that, the one that is running around all over the place and, always opinionated. And I always wanted to try to do things differently. I was very curious as a little girl. And interestingly, it was something that got shut down pretty early on. And so it wasn't until about 8 years ago when I went through a very unexpected divorce that inner child woke back up, and part of that was with my intuition. And so ever since, I've been really trying to disrupt the business space and supporting my clients in doing that. So I love what I do. I feel honored to work with the people that I do, and hopefully there can be more disruptors born in this world because that's how we're going to keep that light shining.
Yes. I'm all for this. I love visionary disruptors too. Like this is one of my favorite things. I recently did a podcast with two sisters called the Passionista Project. And by the way, I'm going to have to make an introduction. But anyway, beautiful sisters, love the ladies. And one of their things is this little piece of paper that you hold up, and it's like, I am blank Passionista. And it's like their thing. And I remember thinking on it, and I was like, what really defines, like, how am I? And disruptor is what came up, which I think is so funny. Why you and I are the same in that. And I was like, I really have always been a disruptor. And I know you and I talked about this a little bit beforehand, but like, I think back to like my high school days. And I'm like, I was always the one who I was friends with everybody, but I also stood up for anybody. Like I didn't put up with that crap. It's how I got my best friend who is now, we've known each other for 20 plus years.
I
We
love
met when
it.
she was in like fifth grade, and somebody was kind of taking advantage of her, and I kept standing up for her. And then it just like, it became the thing. And I found myself doing that for a lot of people. And that was kind of the light bulb moment a couple of years ago in business as well, was I really am a disruptor. And I felt like it was time for me to be a disruptor in regards to domestic violence and us fighting our own silent battles. Like, I have no problem talking about the shitty things that I felt and the
Right.
thoughts that went through my head, which scares a lot of people. And it scared me for a really long time, right? And we
Sure.
tend to suppress all of that because we're so afraid to be judged by everybody else. When in reality, I think it's that we're actually judging ourselves so hard that we project that as somebody else is going to judge us that way, which I find really, really interesting. So I'm super excited to dive into all these things today, especially with two disruptors on board.
That's why I said, buckle up, everybody. It's going to be a good one.
So much fun. So I have a question though. I know that
Yes.
you said that, you felt like you were always kind of this outspoken person, kind of, kind of a disruptor as a kid. And then you said it kind of got shut down for a really long time. And then you kind of like rediscovered that. Can you give me kind of a feeling in that synopsis, like being able to look back on that, like where you felt like you really realize now that like, oh, this really was who I was at one point in time. And this is kind of what started shutting that down, and where I allowed other people to kind of choose who it was that I was supposed to be. And then I would love to know a little bit more about, what kind of gave you that light to feel like you really needed to lean into that when you started feeling the call. Because I feel like a lot of us feel the intuition, we feel that call that we should do something different, but it's so subtle that a lot of times we ignore it. So I'd love to
Yes.
know your space in both of those.
Sure. I mean, it's a whisper, right? Your intuition is a whisper. And I think I'm going to answer this somewhat backwards, but I'll get it all
Yeah.
together and it'll make sense to everybody. But it's really a whisper. And I think that we've been conditioned over time to not listen to the whisper and to instead listen to like that really loud voice, which tends to be our ego. And that what I learned over 4 decades wasn't serving me anymore. And so, how did this all come about? How did I go back and reflect? So I'm going to kind of start with the fact that on both sides of my family, so I am the granddaughter of two sides of the family, of two generations of Holocaust survivors. So imagine what that trauma has, brought into my aura. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of what my grandparents on both sides experienced coming to the United States was it was all about fitting in. It was all about we don't want to stand out. We want to blend, right? You want to be an American, you want to live that dream. And so when I was a little girl, I was this, I have an older sister, I'm the second child. And, my sister and I are very, very different. And I was always the one who, this will sum it up perfectly, you guys. My nickname as a child, my dad used to call me Monkey because that is literally what I was. I had energy. I was all over the place. I was like curious. And, and I do remember, it's not like I can pinpoint and say like, at this moment, this is when I got
Yeah.
shut down. But what I do remember is that there did come a time because I remember certain childhood memories where I was embodying one version of me. And then there was the version of me that essentially is who I became over the course of the next 3 decades or so. And so it was really it was being scolded, it was getting in trouble, right? Getting in
Mm-hmm.
trouble for just being me. And so at one point in time, all of a sudden, it was like, oh, wait, that's not acceptable. The fear of I'm not lovable when I'm acting out is what they called it, that was seen negatively. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I ultimately then became was someone who kept seeking that external validation of like, is this okay? Am I acting okay? And then really being a version of me that was accepted by everybody else instead of honoring who it is that I was. And so ultimately, what I ended up doing is really bringing that into my relationships and into my marriage. I mean, don't get me wrong, even though I am divorced from my kid's father, like he was my best friend, college sweetheart, like absolutely will always love this man, and, he's the father of my kids. And he fit the mold of what I was told I should marry, right?
Mm,
It's like your parents want you, well, at least me growing up, it was marry a
yeah.
doctor, marry a lawyer.
Mhm.
My sister married the doctor, I married the lawyer. Check, check, right? It was like, how many boxes can I check for approval?
Mhm.
And he fit the mold at the time with who I was. And ultimately, when I discovered that he was, unfortunately for him, he was having an affair, when I figured that out, it was that moment in time where all of a sudden, like, my intuition came back. And what you guys, it wasn't like this like massive punch in the gut that like knocked me out and knocked me over. It was very much a like imagine putting your fist up against your hand and really shoving it in. It wasn't like this. It was
Mhm.
like, hello, hello, Wendy, like, wake up. And so that's what it felt like. It wasn't like a shake. It was like a, hey, like, come on. And
That
so,
pressure.
exactly, pressure. Excellent. I'm so glad you're here. So anyway, so this is literally like almost 8 years ago to the day. Next month will be 8 years since that night where my intuition like really woke me back up. And it was in that moment where that whisper suddenly became the voice that I had been ignoring for so long. And I'm even just feeling goosebumps right now, even just saying it, because it was such a powerful moment. And it was the first time in my marriage where I actually stood up for myself and I said, no, something does not feel right. Like, do not talk me out of this. You're wrong. I know I'm right.
Mhm.
And it was kind of that moment where I'm sure, well, I have no idea if he would ever say or admit this, but like it was that moment where it was like, oh crap, she just woke up. Like she just woke up. Like I can't even go backwards now. Like she's just not the same person. Like that's how
Mhm.
insistent I was in my gut and in my intuition. And so over the course of the next year, I really kind of started, I mean, unintentionally, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but looking back, I can say that I was really kind of starting to lean into that and trusting it, to the point where there were moments where I feel like I left my body and words just came out of my mouth. And the time that I was really conscious about that was after not only had I gone back into therapy, but I also learned about life coaching and had hired a coach and got certified as a life coach, because I thought it was super powerful to think about, oh wait, there's a future I can think about. Like I don't have to keep looking in the rear view mirror and like, fixing everything apparently that got messed up when I was a little girl. And so this whole concept of the future was like this wide open. I mean, imagine, someone seeing the ocean for the first time. Like that's literally how it felt to me. And so I remember when my now ex-husband and I walked into our couples therapist office, and it was kind of like the, what are we doing? Like shit or get off the pot kind of
Mm,
conversation.
yeah.
And I literally had this out of body experience where I looked at him and he was like, I don't know. And I'm like, it's been a year. How do you not know? And every bone in my body was like, you're going to make this marriage work, right? It was a test in this moment where I was like, okay, God is testing me right now, because my ego is like, you make this marriage work. Like this was like the family perception that I had. Like no one's divorced in my family. No one gets divorced in
Mhm.
our family. Like you make this work, Wendy. But all of a sudden I literally had like, and I remember this because afterwards I was like, what the hell just came out of my mouth? And I remember looking at him and I stood up and I said, well, I've decided I am done. I am done waiting for you to pick me and I pick me. I said, I'm done. I want a divorce. I looked at the therapist. I said, I'm leaving. I have nothing more to say. And I walked out of the room. And after I walked out, I was like, what the hell just happened? Like, it was so out of body for me. And so what I realized was really in that moment, it was my higher self. It was that version of me that is deeply connected to God saying, it is time to take care of you. It is time for you to put yourself first, which is something I never did in the 16 years that I was married. It was always about my husband. It was always about my children. It was always about my family. And I was like, no more. I am done. I've spent 4 decades doing everything for everybody else. And the minute that this happened, it literally was like my light came back on. And over the course of the next several months, it was things just, like imagine you've got glasses on with the wrong prescription and you take them off and you're like, oh my God, I never needed these to begin with. And suddenly everything is in like 3D. Everything is so crystal clear. But for me, the world became 5D because my heightened intuition really tapped back into my clairvoyance and my ability to really see and hear things that, again, like I can hear and see things for myself, for my clients, etc. And so it really was that day that all of this just, it was like boop, 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 like everything just started clicking into place, lights started coming on. And I haven't stopped since. And, I decided to file for divorce. I left my corporate job, 20-year career in corporate America, to start my own business. And initially it was as a divorce coach, because I was actually helping women to talk about being a disruptor, right? My whole philosophy around divorce was I'm going to disrupt the divorce conversation, because why is it that everybody goes, oh, I'm so sorry, right? When the divorce rate is almost the same as the marital rate. Do you go up to somebody getting married and you're like, so sorry? No. So why isn't it congratulations, right? Like, divorce is not something that when we're standing at the altar, we're like, plan B is still out there, buddy. Like, you never know, right? It's not something you plan for, but like, why can't it be something empowering? And so this whole philosophy around me being a disruptor has really started from when I was a little girl and how it's really evolved. And so yes, I created a divorce business. I walked away from that about a year ago because it wasn't serving me anymore. Like, my disruption needed to happen in a much bigger way. And that was the message that I kept receiving from God of, it's time to move on. It's time for you to start letting the world know like how intuitive you are. And that's where you're going to lead, because you have the ability to really be able to see for people what is possible, how it is that they can create disruption in business in a way that is going to change lives. It's going to change the world, because look what you've done with divorce. And so it was time for me to move on. And it was almost kind of like, I was in a sandbox and now it was time to build my own playground. And so that's the evolution of where kind of I was, and really how it is that I got here. And I was able to create a brand new 6-figure business in under 2 months last year. And, my life is amazing. I'm remarried. I've got 2 kids that, that are amazing adults. I have a stepson. Like it's been beautiful ever since. And ultimately, you've got to be able to shine your light authentically. And until you do so, you really, like, the world is waiting, right? Like, your people are waiting for you.
Yeah.
And you're not just doing yourself a disservice, but you're hurting so many other people that are like waiting for you to shine your light. And it's something that I will never stop doing. And has it come with loss along the way? Absolutely. And I look back and say, I wouldn't choose to be anywhere else.
Yeah.
So that's my story.
And I love that, you talk about owning that, right? That what you went through, because I think that that's the other piece that a lot of us deal with and face. And I think it comes back to several different points that you touched on in your story, which it all comes down to one thing. And it is the fear of the unknown better to test out than staying in the same pattern? And I feel like in everybody's stories, if you really look at where you're at now, what you have been through, and like really kind of break down the timeline, it's in those moments where you make the decision of either I continue in the pattern, which I know what's going to happen, right? Same thing I did in an abusive relationship for 10 years, or the risk of doing this over here, which looks like a giant black hole, makes a lot more sense. And I'm willing to take that risk. And I feel like not enough of us do that, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a huge risk, because I think that some people get that confused. They're like,
Sure.
oh my God, risk means something. No, it's a subtle, right, risk. It's saying something different that you would have had before. It's saying no instead of yes. It's deciding that you want to put yourself first in a couple of scenarios to kind of build up that lever to where you can kind of then lean into the full fear of like, okay, I think I can do this. Like, not everything has to be this big giant risk where we just drop it all and go, okay, I think it's gonna work out. Let's just go for it. Like, we forget that, right? There are
Right.
small risks that we take throughout our life, but we're still in that moment making that choice of, do I go with that small nudge? You get like that little push, like almost like a baby finger, like somebody's trying to get your attention on
Yep.
like your back or your shoulder. And do you
Yep.
decide to follow that and trust that something is going to come out of it that you're supposed to learn, or that is better than what you're in,
Right.
or choose the same? And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. But I heard that in your story several times, was coming back to that fear and being okay with, even unconsciously, like stepping into that fear
Oh
because you
yeah.
knew that it was the moment.
100%. I mean, and I talk about this a lot as well, is that, we all want the breakthrough, but what we want is the through, and we want to just band-aid the break. We're like, can we just get
Yep.
this over with? And one of the things that I'm really good at is sitting with my clients in the break. And that's what everybody avoids, right? Like, we
Mm-hmm.
avoid the break, and we're like, we feel like an inkling of it, and we're like, oh, this is like awful, right? Because we associate it with, this is bad, right? It's all associated with negativity. Well, what if
Mm-hmm.
you put a neutral spin on it? What if it's just information? What if it's just making you aware that there's something else that you've been avoiding, that 99.9% of the time it is manifesting in every other area of your life and you haven't addressed it? So what if it's something that has actually been holding you back? What if transmute that, right? Alchemize what is feeling scary, alchemize the resistance, and lean into it and get curious. And it's the breaking piece that's super important. We didn't get to talk about this when we had our first call, but like, I love that your business, or that you call yourself a Lotus Effect coach, because we didn't even talk about this, which I think is crazy, Kat, but like, my whole thing is the impact that I have, I call it the chrysalis effect. So I invite people into the chrysalis with me, so that when I work with a client, it's like, let's get in the chrysalis. Well, think about what happens to a caterpillar in a chrysalis. They're
Yeah.
completely transforming their entire being. And it's messy, and it's icky, and it's gooey, and it's sticky, and they're in there for a while because they have to wait until the butterfly emerges, right? And so what so many people do is they're like trying to like break out of that chrysalis as fast as they can, versus imagine what would happen if you surrendered, if you
Mm.
just leaned in. And the reason that a lot of people avoid it is because it is uncomfortable and no one's holding them while they're in this place, right? So I'm the cocoon. That's what I create for people. And I've realized that I've been able to not only do that for myself, but to get my own support for me to be able to know how to do that for me, to be able to now teach it to other people. And so I hope that everybody who's listening right now, that, you're kind of having this little poke as you were talking about, right? And you're going, oh my God, this is totally what has been going on with me. And so what are you going to do about it? How is it serving you?
Mm-hmm.
How, like, what's the story that you believe that this has been keeping you safe? What if
Yeah.
it's actually been holding you back? Right? Like, get curious.
And I love that you use the word neutral. That has become like my word for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things, because it's so easy when you start to break down the psychological piece of the brain and how we think and how it functions. It's, to me now, it's kind of funny. Like, sometimes I will be doing certain things, or my kids might be doing something, and like this crazy thought will come in, and I'm like, seriously? Like, that's what you came up with? That's like a 1 in 10 million. Like, that's what we came up with to try to, what? But it's interesting because when you're not aware of those thoughts, you feel that they are yours and like, oh my God, no, I'm predicting this. I know that this is going to happen. I've seen it before on TV or whatever the case may be. And I think that's why a lot of us get overprotective, whether it's with our kids, with our family, with our spouses, with our friends, or even with ourselves. And so then we try to just like blockade everything and put ourselves in this bubble of like, okay, well, if I'm in the plastic, nothing can hurt me. Well, no, I mean, you can pop it. It happens, right? But for some reason,
Yeah.
we don't think about that. But it's really interesting, like you said, that neutral perspective. What can you take in your life that when you think of doing it, your immediate reaction or your immediate thought is, oh my God, it's going to go to shit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see that, how can you just, like you said, neutralize it? This is like one of my favorite terms. It's also how I come into conversations with people now, right? So if
Sure.
I'm having a conversation with someone and I feel like they're getting attacky or this ego is coming out, I'm like, all right, well, that's on you. But it's so much easier to separate so that I don't intake that information as, oh my God, that must be because of me. I must have said something wrong. I must have done something wrong. I'm like, no, I know how I came across. I can't help it that you didn't want to have an open-ended conversation. But I think that coming back to any space of neutrality helps tremendously, because then I believe that the brain is able to process things a little bit different. And so you almost get to, for lack of better terms, assess the risk. Okay, this
Mm,
is what you're giving me. This is what I think could potentially happen if we're looking at it from another site. How likely is it this is actually going to happen and go
right.
wrong, right?
Right.
And then you can kind of break things apart. And that's one of the things that I did several years ago when I stepped into my own journey. Was for me, it was, if I want to believe these different things, then I have to prove to myself that they are true. So
Right.
where can I prove it to myself
Right.
so that the brain begins to see that and it's less likely to go over here? Because it's like, oh
Right.
no, okay, we've got
Right.
this evidence, right? And the
Right.
brain, in my opinion, loves that stuff, right? Anything that we
Yeah.
can bring back to it. But I feel like the neutrality of it is so powerful.
Mhm.
And in my personal opinion, from a control freak, used to be, this is the
Ditto.
ultimate control.
Yes. Well, it's false. It's a false sense of control,
Mm,
right? So, it's so interesting because like I remember when my kids were younger, it's like I would always say to them, like, you only have control over yourself. Like, stop trying to control your brother. And it's the same thing. It's like I should have listened to that advice, like, 10 years ago, right? Like I said that all the time, like, stop trying to control your brother. And here I am, like, trying to control everything outside of me. And I think that the neutrality piece is really what brings us back to what is it in this moment that I do have control over,
mhm.
and reconnecting with that. Like, I mean, you guys, first of all, I'm not a saint. I don't preach this and say I live by it every second of every day. Like, I'm a human being and I get defensive and I react. However, I notice it and then I bring myself back into the neutrality space and I shift, right? So I want people to also understand that, like, it's not something that it's like, oh, I totally messed this up. Never mind. What is, like, this isn't worth it. Instead of like, oh shit, okay, I realize what I just did. And now I have the power, right? I have power, I have control to
Yep.
shift how I'm showing up in relation to somebody else. And like, it just even reminds me, like last night, Jeff and I, my husband, like we got into like the stupidest conversation, almost bordering an argument over something so stupid. And he like starts presenting me with his point of view. And like my ego was just like, oh, this is just like, he's just getting all defensive. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, Wendy, are you really going to start a fight over like this? Like literally, you guys, it was so stupid. It was so stupid. And I was like, you know what? I'm not. Like, this is his perspective. And I literally looked at him and I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. I can totally see how that is your perspective. Like, I'm so sorry that I was not willing to see your perspective. And it literally, like, and it was over. Like, it was over that fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And neutrality it's something I actually learned when I went through a really incredible intensive leadership program. In order for us to really step into our leadership, we've got to learn what neutrality looks like, right? At
Mm,
home, in the workplace, in every area of our life, but it's something we get to practice, and it looks different for everybody, and it takes everybody like a little bit of time to really get back into that place. But I always remind myself, it's like, what do I have control over? Like, I don't have control over how his brain works and processes the information that we're talking about, because he's got 50 years worth of like stories that are playing into his perspective, and I
yeah.
have 40 years of my stories, and I'm like, and they're totally different. So why is mine right and his is wrong, and vice versa? It's not.
Mm-hmm.
That's why this whole concept of neutrality and thinking about what you have control over, you have control over. If you don't understand what somebody is saying, or you don't understand their perspective, well, what do you have control over? You have control over trying to understand it. So asking more questions. That's an interesting perspective. Can you tell me how and why it is that you see it that way? Because I don't get it, and I'm trying to understand.
Yep.
Instead, we just go to like, oh, you're wrong. That's not right. Right? Like,
Yeah. We're
for
not
what?
taught, we're not taught that both opinions could be right.
Exactly.
We have been taught
Exactly.
there's either a right or a
Right or
wrong. There is
wrong.
no middle ground,
Polarity.
right?
We live in
Yep.
a world of polarity. I mean, think
Mm-hmm.
about it. Light, dark, heat, cold, right? Like, not to
Yep.
get political, but it's like Democrat, Republican. Like, everything is like polar, right?
Yeah.
Why? Like, for what? Like, what about those of us that love the gray? Like, I love the
Yep.
gray. Put me in the gray all day, every day, right? Because
Yep.
we're like totally going off on like an interesting tangent here, or I'm about to, but like, that's like why I don't truly believe that there's balance. Like, balance to me is a
Mm-hmm.
facade of safety, because like the way that I see it is that we're on a constant teeter-totter, right? We're on a seesaw of life.
Yep.
And it's like sometimes we're going to tip over and we're like, oh shit, we're off balance. Okay, we got to come back up. And we're there for a second, and then we're like, oh God, here we go again. Okay, well, then we come up. And I don't mean that to be like, oh my God, we're always like trying to adjust. And well, guess what? We're humans, and we're here having experiences, and we're constantly transforming. So
Yep.
yeah, you're always going to be like a little off. You're always learning. And like, isn't that the fun? Isn't that why we're here? And so I think that the polarity is what gives us a false sense of safety. But in reality, the safe place is like in the middle. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where the neutrality lives. Okay, we're coming
Yeah.
back to the neutrality. I got us back.
No, I love the tangent. And it's something that I talk about as well. I always say that, we live in an ebb and flow, just like the ocean,
Hmm.
right? The ocean comes in and the ocean goes out, and the ocean comes
Yes.
in and the ocean goes out. Nothing falls apart when the ocean comes in. Okay, unless there's storms. And then nothing falls apart when it goes back out, right? Like it just is what it is. And sometimes it takes
Right.
a little bit of sand with it. And then sometimes it
Exactly.
brings shells back up onto the land, right? And then sometimes it takes shells back out with it. And sometimes it brings treasures. Like, I mean, it's constantly back and forth. But I agree with you. I think that we as a society have been taught that it's either left or right, and there's not the
Yes.
opportunity for both. And what you said earlier was ask questions. I love this concept. I talk about this a lot. The more that I learn to ask questions in my relationship and even with my teenagers, the more that I learned. And then I was like,
Hmm.
oh,
Light bulbs.
that makes sense. Like, but it
Yes.
opens you to so many different perspectives. But that means that you do have to let go of your own ego of thinking that only your way is right, and viewing it as, the famous saying, will agree to disagree. I think that that should be used more often. there's no reason why we can't. And I think that coming back to the beginning, you use your intuition to judge those situations, to base that on, like, is this worth the conversation? Am I feeling the nudge to just stop? Am I noticing that maybe the other person is getting upset? Maybe it's triggering and I didn't even realize that. Like, there's so many different pieces in it. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask you as we're kind of coming toward the end was, I would love to know your definition of intuition, because I feel like, right, there's an overarching, it's something inside of us, it's telling us something, but I feel like each one of us kind of has our own definition of what it means to us and how it comes to us as well.
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And for me, what intuition is it's really that gentle whisper. It is that gentle nudge that you feel in a very specific place within your body. And it is your highest self speaking to you. I talk a lot about sensations, and I think that we think that, like, it's mind over body, but it's actually body over mind. But we're trained to pay attention to the mind first. And so what intuition is all about is retraining yourself to start paying attention to the body, to start paying attention to the sensations inside of you, of when my intuition is speaking to me, where in my body do I feel it? Because there's a very big difference between intuition and fear, and we mistake the two. The fear is typically like the loud, the intense, the heaviness. It's your head, versus your intuition is really coming from a much softer, gentler, quieter, calmer place. And so it's really about learning for you where those two sensations are in your body, to be able to understand and distinguish the two. But at the end of the day, your intuition is what we should all be listening to. And again, I think that it's a little taboo, because it's like, oh, that's like, intuition is like woo woo. Well, no, it's actually what powers the world. Like, it's a frequency that is connected to a higher power. It's connected to the light. It's connected to God. Like, that is the frequency that we should all be vibrating at. And so if we're not listening to it, you're perpetuating this ego, this dark, this is my opinion, ego, this dark, versus it's really, you've got to start retraining yourself and just play with it. Like, see what the difference is. Like, what is the worst that's going to happen if you try it differently? Like, literally, like, what is the worst thing? Oh no, it may work. Oh no, it may, like, produce a different result, but is it a bad result if it's not the one you thought was going to happen, right? Neutrality, bringing that in. So intuition, at the end of the day, it's a sensation, and it is something that you've got to turn the volume up for yourself, because it's set at its frequency, and it's a matter of you learning to turn it up by tuning in.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And you're so right. It's being present in your day to day. It's being present with yourself. It's being present in those moments, even in rage or being upset or whatever the case may be, and just being aware of it so that you can become more aware of it when it comes up in different situations. And then that's how I feel like you can really take, like, a full body assessment and be like, okay, we're going to do some inventory, and be able to kind of break it down. So, oh my gosh, Wendy, I feel like we could just keep going. But as we come to a close, I have one question I always ask every single one of my guests, and that is, do you happen to have a quote or a piece of advice you would like to leave the audience with?
I do. I mean, my quote that I'm known for, and it's the name of my podcast, which Kat will be on. You guys should check it out. But it's really about learning the power in the pause. I get like full body chills every time I even say it. What is most important in life is slowing down, because it's in the slowdown where the most incredible things happen. You talked about earlier, Kat, about getting present. And that is something that we don't do enough of. And it's really recognizing that when you gift yourself with the pause, with the slow down, you're gifting yourself with tapping back into the present moment, because the only time that it truly exists is right now, right now, right now, right? That's it. You can't go back. And I mean, we can talk, it's another episode about going forward, but the only time that exists is really the now. And so I invite each and every one of you to start tapping into and recognizing the power in the pause. And that's my mic drop.
Bam. Mic
Boom.
drop. Just ignore me, everybody. I got sleep last night. So do us all a favor, Wendy, then please tell us all, how can everybody find you? How can they connect with you? How can they be in your world?
Yes. Well, I thank you first and foremost for having me. I love you deeply and I love talking to you, and I can't wait for you to be on my show. So first and foremost, come check out my podcast, The Power in the Pause. It's available on all platforms. You can also follow me across social media at Wendy Paige Sterling. And then you guys can also check out my website, wendypagesterling.com. I've got a ton of freebies that you guys can access. And I really look forward to connecting with all of you and hopefully continuing a conversation that inspires you to shine your light in this world. So thank you, Kat, for having me.
You are so welcome. You are definitely a bright light, Wendy. So thank you so much. I loved having you today. We're going to have to continue conversations.
Yes.
To everybody else that's out there, don't worry. We'll have all that information in the show notes. Make it super easy for you to be able to click on it and find Wendy so that you can connect with her. I hope that you got some amazing takeaways. I hope you were taking notes. And if you're someone that's been thinking about playing with your intuition, we both strongly encourage you to keep following that path. So, Wendy, again, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. See you soon.
Thank you. And to everybody else that's out there, don't forget, until next time, do one thing positive for someone each and every day and see the difference that it makes in your life. So until next time, have a fantastic day. Hello again, and thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought tons of value, we ask that you please share, like, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to reach even more inspiring entrepreneurs who can benefit from these powerful conversations. If you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, as this feedback is an amazing gift that fuels our growth and helps us to continually improve this podcast. Looking for an extra dose of inspiration and empowerment? Then be sure to connect with me on social media. You can find me at The Lotus Effect, where I share valuable resources and tips while sharing my own journey of being an entrepreneur. And if you're interested in learning more about my coaching programs and services, be sure to check out my website at the-lotus-effect.com. Once again, thank you so much for being a part of Real Chat with Kat. Your presence and support makes all the difference. Remember, whether you find yourself in the depths of the mud or on the path of growth, we all have a unique journey. And just like the lotus, some of us start in the dirtiest of mud, yet as we rise and grow, we blossom into something beautiful, unique, and truly one of a kind. To all of my visionaries out there, keep rising and growing as you create your own Lotus Effect.